and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and this week we are doing another co-hosted episode with Hayley. Hayley, welcome back to the Content 10x podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
Oh, well, really looking forward to this. So this is part 2 of our expert interview series. So hopefully you were able to listen to the last episode, but if not, please do check it out, because on the podcast, we're running a series and it's all about expert interviews. So we're so passionate about this. If you can do expert interviews with people within your organization, that can power an entire content strategy. There's so much content that can come from expert interviews, but they're not easy. This is why we're doing a series on them, because we have so much to say about this. In the last episode, we just introduced the concept of why they are so powerful and what you can do with them. But now we're breaking this down. So in this episode, Hayley and I are going to be talking about how to prepare for your expert interviews. And then we're going to do a separate episode entirely on how to actually run the expert interviews. And then we're going to do another episode on what you actually do with the content and how you can make the most of it and repurpose it and what to do with it. And we're going to do an episode after that as well, covering all the different FAQs that we get on the expert interview process. So there's so much to cover, which is why we decided to do a whole series on this. So today we're covering how do you prepare. So Hayley, let's get started with this. There's a lot to cover, isn't there? So where do you start? You know, you're going to do an expert interview. Where do you start with this from a content planning perspective?
So I guess from the get-go, it really starts with what is your company's overall goal or strategy for running these? You know, kind of bottom line, how do these expert interviews align with, you know, your content pillars that you have, and really getting to the bottom of the purpose of the interview itself. You know, what makes those interviews unique? What points are you trying to kind of get across? What deep expertise do you have that your audience wants to know? Or, for example, what are they actually searching for out there? Does your company have any regular questions that you tend to get asked? You could provide that in kind of an interview context like this expert interview, or maybe it's some industry knowledge gaps that you might be able to address within this expert interview. And, you know, we're going to cover it all, but also, you know, are you planning on doing this interview as a standalone interview, a one-off? So maybe it might be a customer story or case studies, or is it a series? Are you trying to kind of work across a strategy where maybe, you know, it might be a bi-weekly episode or a monthly episode where you're kind of taking somebody through this whole journey, and you've got so much content that you actually think it's going to be better to be delivered by an expert interview series. But overall, when it comes to planning, like, our key recommendation is coming down to the strategy and that storyline. So whether it's a one-off standalone episode, what's the story of that singular episode from start to finish? Or if it's a series, what's your full storyline from start to finish, episode 1 to episode 24? You know, what's that key story? You know, let's not try and get too much information in one expert interview when actually it might be better and detailed and more in-depth and thorough across multiple episodes. So really, it's everything for us. We're so passionate about these expert interviews, but we're really passionate about strategy. So we'd really recommend plan it out. Get with your team, plan it out, decide the topics, decide what your audience wants to know. Brainstorm with all of your team. You have kind of frontline workers. Remember, it's beyond the C-suite as well. Mm-hmm. Who are those people that you're going to interview? And also, who is going to host it? I guess that's the other one, isn't it, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's those two really important who's, isn't there? Because as you said, I think that quite often you can really just jump to, oh, let's do an expert interview, do it on video, get lots of content, and just jump straight to thinking, well, who would we interview? And you make a really good point that firstly, just work out where it fits into the overall content strategy, like you said, Hayley, and understanding the topics, what you want to be known for, what content you want to put out there, where it's going to fit into the funnel, problems are you trying to solve for your audience, and all of that you just explained, like knowing that strategy first to then work out the who's. And as you just said, like, you know, who are you going to interview? Who has that deep expertise that's going to fit in with the content pillars that you've decided are going to be pillars that you're going to focus on in your content marketing, from subject matter experts that could be more technical experts, they could be more functional or industry experts, as you said, Hayley, like beyond the C-suite. So at all different levels within the organisation, there are different experts that perhaps could be interviewed as part of the content that you're creating. And then there are, other things to think about as well from the expert being interviewed. Of course, it's a communication process. So you'll also be thinking about, are they a good communicator? Because some people, have really deep expertise in certain things, but perhaps aren't necessarily going to be the person that you decide is going to be good to sit down and do an interview and create content from. But then could they be coached? So, maybe somebody you would think isn't going to be best straight away, but with a bit of coaching, perhaps they could be. And I don't think you can always assume, can you? You can have someone you think is going to be excellent as an expert being interviewed that actually isn't when the cameras and the mics are switched on. And then other people who you actually think, well, he knows everything, but I just don't think he'd be good at creating content, and they can really surprise you. And when you've done this, Hayley, working with our clients, you've definitely had situations where it's been really surprising that somebody hasn't been, the type of communicator that perhaps you thought they were going to be, haven't you?
Absolutely. I had a fantastic client who pre-warned me that somebody that I was going to be interviewing would be quite dry and quite flat, and that, they would need a lot of kind of pre-coaching, ahead of the interview itself. But actually, when we were on screen and hit record, it was like a TV presenter came to life. They were phenomenal, to the point that actually they're now hosting. So where I was facilitating, we've now arranged it that he is the main interviewer. He was that good. So I would really say strongly, don't assume, and I think we all know that there are those people who are incredibly personable in real life, and you think, oh God, they're going to be brilliant in front of the screen, but you hit record and they freeze. So it goes both ways. So definitely don't assume. Get people in front of the camera, see what they're like. Some people come to life that you may not have assumed. I think all of us were, obviously I didn't know the client personally. It was the first time that we were interviewing, but I think the rest of the team that were on the call were kind of blown away by how incredible he was. So I would definitely say, don't assume that the team that you're with in a work environment might not be great on camera, because they could really, really surprise you. So it's definitely worth considering those people who you may not have considered before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we mentioned this in the last episode as well, but it's also fine if sometimes it's not on camera, so to speak. If you decide that some content is just going to be from the interview perspective, but the video footage isn't, or even the audio isn't going to be used, because that content is going to go on and become more written case studies and social content and things like that. That's still going to be really good content, isn't it? But we have that who, so obviously the person being interviewed, the expert. So then you have the other who that you just mentioned, Hayley. So that's the person actually running the interview. So asking the questions, the interviewer, the facilitator, that's another important who in the preparation that you have to decide. Now, this could be someone internally who is going to be, the host of the content and going to run those interviews, or you could work with someone outside. So, for example, also at Content 10X, this is something that we do where we're hired to come in and plan and run these expert interviews and create the content from it. Obviously, that there's loads of factors that determine, whether you want to go one way or the other. But a key thing that you want to decide is the person who's going to be asking the questions and running the interview and facilitating, are they going to be in the content? So when you have the final pieces of content, the long form video, maybe it could be a podcast episode, it could be social videos. Are you going to have the interviewer and the facilitator in it? Or are they purely going to guide what the expert says, and the only content you're going to then take is the content from the expert speaking? And there's no right or wrong to that at all. That just depends on the format and what you want to go for. But it's definitely something that you need to plan, isn't it? And just check, how are you going to create the repurposed content afterwards, and who's going to feature in that? So That's really key, isn't it, Hayley? Just to know the two who's, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know that we're going to cover those two who's a bit more in the next episode, of really kind of the benefits of having a facilitator as well, because there are benefits that a lot of people might not have considered.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're really, really key areas in terms of the who's of it and kind of planning it out. And I guess there's a little bit more in terms of the other phases of planning the interview itself as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
We consider two phases of it is, planning the interview itself, and then also the technical side of things too. And, we definitely do have a few anecdotes about technical side of things, don't we, Amy?
Yeah. You really do need to check the setup, no matter how many times you've done these things. Can go wrong.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, in terms of planning, and we'll go through in the next episode really the running of the interview itself. But this one, you really need to, exactly as we mentioned beforehand, of planning out the storyline of the episode itself or the series. You really need to plan in the actual questions that you're going to be answering. Our biggest tip: make sure you have loads of open-ended questions. That's how you get the best content out. If you start asking loads of closed questions where your team can just answer yes or no, there's no positive flow of the conversation and communication. So make sure those questions are open-ended. Please also, we work with so many clients who've got legal departments. You'll probably likely need to review them and get them approved by legal first. And certainly it's great if you've got, a team like ourselves where we know buzzwords that, that are going to flag legal, that, we can edit out after, or, just remind the team maybe to say certain terms rather than one term or the other. We have had that with quite a few clients as well. I guess as well, the other element is we've got an expert interview guide, which we'll talk about later. But the one recommendation that we make within it is when you're planning out those questions, just write some key bullet points of those key points that you want to make. It's most important that you hit those points without reading off the script. That's where we would definitely recommend reading them beforehand, but just making sure you're not reading off a script, but making sure that you've hit those key points that you want to communicate to your audience as well. And also, obviously, this is will be the fourth episode that we're going to be talking through in depth, but think about the content that you want to create from this interview. So when we were talking about planning out, the strategy of it, this is the first long piece of content. What are those shorter pieces of content that you actually want to distribute at the end, those repurposed elements? How many teaser videos do you think that you want to glean from this? A carousel that you want, graphics? Are you going to do like a highlights video? Are you going to do multiple, where you look at multiple episodes and pull content from each of them to kind of create a series? So really look at all of that, of what's the output that you want of all of your content. And then we then suggest plan everything and go back and review the initial questions. So plan that structure again to fit in with the content and the repurposing, because you might have thought about everything, but actually when you come to plan the shorter form content, you might be missing a certain few points that actually let's kind of make sure we include those. And then consider the expert. So please share the interview questions with them ahead of time. There is nothing worse than getting somebody on a call who has no preparation of it whatsoever. They're flustered, they're not prepared, they don't get to bring their point of view. You might have ideas, they might bring their own ideas. They're very likely to bring their own ideas to the table, and give them their own time to do their own research, create their own bullet point lists, meet with them, share with them. The most important thing of any content that is the upfront planning and preparation. The more you plan, the more you prepare, the better the content output will be in the long run. And then also, we kind of joked about it earlier, but please give both the interviewer and the interviewee the knowledge and time they need to prepare for the technical requirements ahead of time. There is nothing worse than kind of jumping on a call without the technical bits that you need and having to reschedule it. It can be quite frustrating, and everybody's time is obviously very precious. And so, make sure that you book that time in well in advance, give everything over, all the technical equipment, make sure that you're remembering their lighting, their audio, their internet speed. That's very, very important. And so what we suggest to do is, it's important if you're doing a standalone episode or a video series, but especially if you're doing a video series, do a pre-interview briefing, kick off with the whole team of what technical checks, what the point purpose is of it, what elements that you might be missing. If you haven't got the right headphones or the right mic, get that all prepared, because I promise you, the more polished your content is, the better it's going to be performing out there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on all of that. It's just so important. Everyone's time is valuable. The time of, yourself doing the interview, or the facilitator and the expert themselves. So making sure that you really do kind of nail it and get as much as you can does come from that preparation, doesn't it? And I was just going to mention, as you were saying, Hayley, about when you're thinking through what you're going to create afterwards, to make sure that you ask the questions that are going to enable that content to come about. So, you're thinking, well, it'd be great to do the storytelling image carousel on this. So, what questions are you going to ask to make sure that that content comes out? And, the great topics that if we could just get a short soundbite on that, then that's going to be great. So short social content. So planning the questions around that. But I was also just thinking about the long form too. So if it's a particular expert that you're interviewing and you have a really specific long form blog post or cornerstone article, something really meaty that you want to do, say really in-depth hour interview, but you really do have a plan for this blog post that you're going to write afterwards, then again, if you've done the prep in advance and you've already written out the blog outline and you at least know the H1s and the H2s and things like that, and then you plan the questioning around that, working with the person you're being interviewed and asking them, then you'll have almost the structure of the blog post there as well. So it's all in the planning. If you do the interview and then afterwards are working out these things, you're surely going to spot the gaps and think, like if only we'd asked that question. And you don't want that to happen. You want to plan in advance. And like you said, the tech check. So we do this for a living, yet we still had some tech mishaps in embarking upon this expert interview series, which is quite ironic, really, isn't it? Because, it's ironic, but we in the last minute decided to move. We were going to record this expert interview series on Zoom, and then we decided to move over to Riverside, didn't we? And had our own mishaps of just picking up the right mics and the right cameras and the right this and that and upload speed on the internet and things like that. You don't want that to happen in the real expert interview itself. So sometimes it's worth just doing a test run, isn't it? Booking in quick 15-minute call a few days or a week before, just to check all the settings and things like that. And the other things that you check as well. So something that you might not really see until the moment you hit record is just making sure that if it is going to be video content, that things like the background and the lighting are all okay as well. We can check the tech, the mics and the cameras and the headphones and things like that. But, I'm sure you're the same, Hayley. I've certainly had a situation before where we were about to embark upon an expert interview for the podcast, and the background was just so wrong, like in the politest possible way, just having to say, I just don't think we would want to put content out where we can see that in the background. We need to change this. Sometimes you do just have to be bold, don't you? And you do control that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely do. And also, I think, coming back to the importance of a facilitator in that, there's been instances, for example, where I've been on a call and we've noticed somebody's video glares if she moved out of frame slightly. So it's just noticing those elements and just knowing that actually I could suggest to just pause and then wait for the screen to come back and then go from there. But, there's nothing worse than kind of bad audio, bad video. The content's kind of pointless to put out at that point in time. So we would always definitely recommend, setting a new date to hold that interview. And definitely coming back to the technical checks, as a facilitator, the one thing I want to do when I join a call and facilitate it is to make everybody feel as comfortable as possible. Feel comfortable, feel confident. And there's nothing worse than being thrown by flustering around, doing tech checks, making sure that I've got a mic, testing a headphone, it's not working, finding another headphone, going to the office, getting somebody else's mic or headphones, or, maybe they've got a different light. you tend to get a bit flustered because you also realize that you've got a short window of time that you need to record this interview for. So it's so important to do those pre-interview checks so that actually the facilitator or the interviewer's time can just have the first few minutes of really building that confidence, really building that kind of atmosphere, rather than starting on a back foot, which, definitely would throw everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And that's why there isn't really a one size fits all with the prep, isn't it? Because there are some people who are really seasoned experts that go on podcasts quite a lot and go on panels quite a lot, and they're going to be a bit more pro at these things. And it's probably a more straightforward process of running through the questions and sending some tech setup in advance, and you're kind of away and they're at ease with these situations. And there'd be a completely different prep and approach for somebody that, hasn't necessarily done these things before. You might have that pre-interview call and it's more putting them at ease and it's collaborating a bit more on the questions. And it's just, you have to it's a people first content, a people first approach. It's expert led, isn't it? So that's why, you're going to have slightly different processes. It makes sense why we've decided to split this up because, as I mentioned, the first episode of the series, introducing you to the concept of the power of expert interviews and the content that can be created. And we've just done this whole episode only on the preparation alone. That's how important we think it is. In the next episode, we're going to cover the running of the actual interview itself, and then we're going to come on to the content afterwards. So I guess our key things are just always make sure that you prepare, think about who you're going to interview and think about who is going to run it and facilitate it, and make sure before you start with the who's that you've planned the actual content strategy itself and where it fits into the overall content strategy for the company and the core pillars and the problems that you want to be solving within your content and understanding your audience. And then you want to get down to the questions and the content that's going to come from the interviews, and making sure that everyone's going to be at ease and everything's set up technically and everything's good to go. Now, to help you with this, Hayley's already mentioned this earlier, but we have our impactful interview guide. So this is just a free guide that we have a free download that you can get at content10x.com/interview-guide. But if you listen to this on any podcast app, just be able to pop down to the podcast show notes and click on the link to that, or you'll find it easily on our website in our resources section. But that's a useful guide either for if you are going to be running these interviews with experts in order to glean content, or if you are going to be the expert being interviewed. This guide is super useful. It covers many of the things we've talked about today. So some checklists and prep checklists on tech setup and preparing questions and helpful tips and things like that. So do go and grab that. And then in the next episode, like I said, we're going to go on to talk about running the interview itself. So to get you excited for the next episode, here's a quick snippet from that episode.
So there's nothing more important than me than a 5-10 minute warm up before we hit record. So do make sure. So for example, if you're recording and you're aiming to do a half an hour recording, set an interview for 45 minutes so that you have a 10-minute pre-interview rapport, tech checks, and a 5-minute kind of, review of how that interview went. I find it that it's kind of like anything. If you're going for a run, for example, is the best one, you're not going to run out the front door. You're going to do a little bit of a warm up and kind of get into the rhythm of things before you're then going to start sprinting. And this is the same with our expert interviews. We want to create that warm up, that really warm vibe, because people connect to people.
Great. So I hope you are excited for that next episode. We certainly are. And we're also going to be doing an FAQ episode at the end of this series. Just any questions that you have about this, about using expert interviews at the heart of your content strategy. So if you have any questions that you would like us to cover in that FAQ episode, then just send them over to info@content10x.com, and we would love to see them and hopefully incorporate that into that final wrap-up episode of the series. And as always, please do leave us a review on whatever podcast app you are listening to this. If you are listening, we'd really, really appreciate it. But yeah, Hayley, I think that's everything we wanted to cover in this preparation episode, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. A whole episode on preparation. And then, the next one we're looking forward to.
On to the next one. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you need any help with your repurposing, if you want help with running expert interviews like this, or with any other types of content, strategy creation or repurposing, then this episode is brought to you by Content 10x. So please do head to content10x.com to find out more about how we can help. But otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.